I was lifting a tray of stuffing to the table, my back aching, my hands trembling, when my younger brother Joel tapped his glass and announced to the entire family, it's time for Ruth to move out. Laughter followed, but no one saw the way my breath caught in my throat. After all these years of sacrifice, caring for our mother through chemo, using my own savings to keep the house afloat, while Joel chased startups and divorces they wanted me gone, I had missed weddings, turned down promotions, and sold jewelry to pay bills. And now they treated me like a stray. But what Joel didn't know was this: the deed to the house had been in my name for 5 years. My name is Ruth Delaney, and I live in Vermont. I was lifting the casserole dish cheddar scalloped potatoes, my mother's favorite, when Joel raised his wine glass and tapped it with his butter knife like he was making a toast. Everyone quieted, waiting for him to speak. My niece paused mid-scroll on her phone. My sister-in-law leaned in, smiling politely. I expected Joel to thank me for cooking, for keeping the house decorated in mom's style, or at least for making sure everyone had somewhere to come for Christmas. But instead, he cleared his throat and said loud and cheerful, "So, I think it's about time Ruth moved out, right?" Laughter. Polite chuckles at first. Then someone said, "You're terrible, Joel," but still grinned. Another mumbled, "It's about time, honestly." My heart stopped, but my hands didn't. I carefully set the casserole down on the table, the dish clinking against the trivet, and straightened up as if I hadn't heard what I'd just heard. But I had, every syllable. I stood there, my apron dusted with flour, my feet swollen, a grease stain on my sleeve, while my family giggled at the idea of pushing me out of the very home I sacrificed decades to preserve. No one looked at me. Not really. They glanced, smiled awkwardly, then returned to their plates, like I was the maid who had just overstayed her welcome. Joel grinned and shrugged. I mean, come on, Ruth's been living here for 8 years now? Since Mom passed time to spread those wings? He winked. Fly. I didn't respond. Not because I was speechless, but because I was stunned by how expected this all felt. The betrayal wasn't sharp. It was dull, like a bruise I'd been ignoring for years. It didn't surprise me that Joel said it. It surprised me that I'd convinced myself all these years that he wouldn't. I took a seat at the far end of the table, the seat my mother used to sit in, the one with the velvet cushion. It used to hold so much power, so much presence. Now it felt cold beneath me. My niece asked, "Auntie Ruth, are you okay?" I nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, sweetie, just a bit tired." But I wasn't tired. I was done. Done pretending this family respected me. Done pretending that being quiet, being giving, being selfless would somehow make them love me more. I had spent the last 20 years of my life sacrificing for this family, giving up promotions, romantic relationships, my own home, all because I was the reliable one. The one who would care for Mom when she got sick. The one who would pay the mortgage when Joel blew through his startup money. The one who'd miss weddings and birthdays to babysit, to clean, to hold the center together when everyone else was too busy living. And now I was nothing but a punchline. I watched Joel pile mashed potatoes onto his plate, watched his wife Pamela sip from the wine I bought, listened to the distant echo of the Christmas music I'd turned on that morning while baking gingerbread. No one at the table knew what I knew: that the house they were eating in this home, filled with so many memories, with walls still bearing faint pencil marks from childhood height measurements, with my mother's wedding china in the cabinet, belonged to me. 5 years ago, just before she passed, Mom sat me down at the kitchen table. Her hands were thin, papery, but still strong. "Ruth," she'd said, her voice raspy, "you've done everything for me, for this family, this house. It's yours now. I want it in your name. Joel and the others will have their own lives, but I know you'll protect this place." I tried to argue. I told her we could wait, but she insisted. That very month, she transferred the deed into my name, quietly, respectfully, without ceremony. And I kept it that way, because I thought somehow if I just kept giving, they'd eventually see me, appreciate me. But Joel had made it clear tonight they never would. I looked around the table, suddenly detached from it all. Like I was seeing these people, my family, for the first time, not as people I loved, but as people who had never once thanked me. Not for the food, not for the roof, not for the years of care. They assumed I'd always be here in the background, like wallpaper, useful, quiet, replaceable. And in that moment, I knew I refused to be wallpaper any longer. I bit into a dry roll and forced a smile when someone passed me the gravy. The taste of everything faded. My mouth was full of silence. I kept my eyes down. But inside me, something old cracked open like the first tug of spring beneath winter ice. I had been raised to serve, to be kind, to keep the peace. But now I understood something else. Kindness without boundaries is self-erasure. And I had erased myself for far too long. That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet, I didn't cry. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the living room couch, and pulled out the deed from the drawer beneath the TV. My name, Ruth Evelyn Delaney. It gleamed beneath the overhead light like a blade. I traced the edges of the paper with one finger and whispered to no one. You want me out, Joel. You should have read the fine print. I had spent a lifetime giving. Now I would take back something priceless: control. I didn't start out bitter. I started out hopeful. Hopeful that if I kept giving, kept showing up, kept loving them the right way, eventually someone would see me, value me, love me back. But love, I've learned, doesn't always live where it should. When I was 29, my mother had her first heart attack. Joel was only 20 then, still partying his way through college, calling home for cash and emergency rent money. My older sister Denise had just moved to Texas with her new husband. That left me, Ruth Delaney, the responsible one, the caretaker, the fallback. I'll stay, I told the doctor without even glancing at the others. I quit my job 2 weeks later, sold my condo, and moved back into the house I'd left behind a decade earlier. I told myself it was temporary, a few months maybe, just until Mom got stronger. But months bled into years. And once you're the one who sacrifices people, stop asking if you're okay. They start expecting it. Mom needed round-the-clock care by the time her third hospital visit came. I learned how to give injections, how to manage insulin, how to massage aching joints and clean soiled sheets with one hand while holding her hand with the other. I gave up job offers. Romantic relationships fizzled, some never even started. What man wants to date a woman in her 40s with no career and a dying mother? Joel rarely visited. When he did, he'd show up empty-handed and leave with a casserole dish or a guilt-laced joke. You're such a saint, Ruthie, he'd say. I don't know how you do it. I didn't do it because I was a saint. I did it because I loved her. And that's what made it so easy for the rest of them to let me. I paid the bills out of my own dwindling savings. When the furnace broke, I used my emergency fund. When Joel got laid off and asked to borrow just $2,000 for a month, I gave it knowing I'd never see it again. When Denise called crying because her husband had maxed out their credit cards, I mailed a check with no return address. They all needed me in quiet, shameful ways. But when the moment came to acknowledge me in public at holidays, at birthdays, I was just Ruth. Aunt Ruth. Old Ruth. The one who still lived in the family house like she couldn't figure life out. The spinster. The servant. And I played along. I baked the cakes. I ironed the napkins. I hosted every Christmas and Easter and 4th of July. Because Ruth has the house and the time. Yes, I had the house, and I had time. Because I had given everything else up for them. I told myself it was worth it. That someday there'd be a moment, a glance, a word, a gesture that would prove it hadn't been in vain. That anyone would say, Ruth, thank you. You saved us. But that moment never came. Instead, they laughed as Joel suggested I move out of the very home I'd spent decades preserving. I think the part that hurt the most wasn't the words, it was the ease with which they said them. The total absence of hesitation. Like they had already had this conversation without me. Like I wasn't family, I was furniture. I remember one winter evening about 6 years ago, Mom had just come back from her final hospital stay. She was weak, barely able to eat, but her mind was still sharp. We were sitting in the den, the fire crackling in the hearth, snow flurrying outside like a silent ballet. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin was paper-thin, blue-veined, and cold. I don't want you to end up like me, she said quietly, trapped in this house. I smiled. You're not trapped, Mom. She looked at me with eyes so clear they felt like glass. I was. And so are you. That was the night she told me she wanted me to have the house, that she'd already started the paperwork. I protested, but she insisted. Joel's never here. Denise has her own world. But you kept this family from falling apart. And yet, when she died, the first words out of Joel's mouth were, So, what are we doing with the house? Not how are you, Ruth? Not thank you for being there in the end. Just business, just assumption. I didn't tell him about the deed. Not then. I kept it tucked away like a secret diary, because part of me still believed they'd change. That if I just waited, if I just loved them long enough, hard enough, they'd remember who I was, what I'd done. But time has a way of exposing the truth. And the truth is, I was never a sister to them. I was a role, a function. I was the emergency exit they never thanked, never noticed until they were ready to close the door on me too. But now they had crossed the line. Joel's words at dinner weren't just a joke. They were a declaration, a reminder that in their eyes my time was up. I had served my purpose. Now it was time to be discarded like a threadbare dish towel. I spent the rest of Christmas night alone in my room, the laughter downstairs echoing through the vents. My feet ached, my back throbbed. But worse than the physical pain was the ache of knowing I was utterly unseen. Until that night, I had been afraid of being alone. Now I was terrified of staying. I pulled the deed from my drawer again, read my name slowly like it was a poem I hadn't memorized yet. Ruth Evelyn Delaney. Owner. Not guest, not intruder. Owner. I placed the paper back inside the drawer and whispered to myself, I will not die in a house where I am unwelcome. They would learn soon enough. It was an early spring afternoon when my mother signed the house over to me. The crocuses were just starting to push through the half-frozen earth, and she sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl I'd knitted for her the winter before. Her hands, though trembling, held the pen with fierce clarity. We didn't speak much that day. There wasn't much to say. She'd already made the decision. The lawyer, a kind man named Mr. Halverson, slid the documents across the table with soft, reverent movements, as though he understood the weight of what we were doing. She didn't look at me when she signed, but after the last stroke of the pen, she let out a long, trembling breath and whispered, This house should belong to the one who kept it alive. I didn't cry. Not then. I nodded, folded the papers, and tucked them into the manila envelope, as if I were tucking in a child for the night. I held them close to my chest as I walked them up to my bedroom, past the family portraits, past the scuffed baseboards I had cleaned with vinegar and hope. I placed them in the drawer beside my bed, under my old journals, and closed it gently. And then I sat on the edge of my mattress and exhaled. It was the first time in years that I had felt something close to dignity. But I also felt guilt. A deep, gnawing guilt that I had accepted something that Joel and Denise didn't know about, that I'd said yes to the one thing that meant everything to our family without involving them. I told myself I would tell them soon. But time passed, seasons changed, and every time Joel called it was to ask for something. Money, favors, babysitting. Never to say thank you, never to ask how I was holding up. Denise only called on birthdays and holidays, and even then her voice was distant, rehearsed. She sent the occasional card with a picture of her kids and a generic note. Hope you're doing well, Auntie Ruth, as if I were an old coworker, rather than the sister who sacrificed her life to hold the family together. And still, I stayed silent. I suppose I kept the deed to myself out of cowardice. Or maybe somewhere deep down, I knew the truth: they didn't deserve this house. Not anymore. They had already moved on with their lives, while I stood still in the ruins of ours. I dusted the memories. I mended the curtains. I kept Mom's rocker by the fireplace exactly where she left it. Every corner of this house whispered her name, her strength, her absence, and mine. So I became the guardian of that silence. And in doing so, I became invisible. The irony didn't escape me. Owning the house made me no more powerful in their eyes. If anything, it made me smaller, because I still cooked. I still cleaned. I still said yes when I wanted to scream no. But the deed, that piece of paper, was my quiet rebellion. I'd take it out some nights when the loneliness ached like a broken rib. I'd run my fingers over the ink, let the weight of my name settle into my bones. Ruth Evelyn Delaney, sole owner. I never imagined I'd need to use it, but I kept it close like a weapon no one else knew I carried. When Joel mocked me at Christmas, he thought he was speaking to the family maid, the pathetic old sister who'd clung to a house out of desperation. He didn't know I was the landlord. That single piece of paper held the power to undo every illusion they had about me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't lost. I was waiting for the moment when they pushed me too far. That moment had arrived. After the Christmas dinner disaster, I sat with the deed in my lap and felt a strange stillness inside me. Not rage, not sorrow. Readiness. The kind of readiness that comes from knowing you've played their game for too long and it's time to flip the board over. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to explain. I would show them. I would prove to them that the woman they had ignored, dismissed, and ridiculed was the same woman who held the key to everything they thought they controlled. I started small. I called Mr. Halverson again, told him I might be ready to sell. His voice lit up. Are you sure, Miss Delaney? That's a prime piece of property. You'll get a good price. I'm not worried about the price, I said. I'm ready for peace. I began sorting through drawers, not like someone tidying up, but like someone preparing to leave a place for good. I found old photos, letters from Mom, a birthday card Joel had made me when he was 10. I smiled even then. Not everything about this house was stained. Some of it still held joy. but I was done preserving the past for people who spit on the present. For the first time in years, I made plans for myself. I researched quiet towns with beautiful lakes. I looked up cottages for sale in upstate New York and northern Vermont. I pictured myself reading by a window, no voices shouting through the vents, no footsteps pounding with entitlement. I imagined a life that was mine. A life with no begging, no pleasing, no shrinking. I called a realtor named Sandra, who spoke gently like she understood what it meant to let go of something that had consumed your identity. "We'll do this at your pace," she said. My pace, I repeated. I'd forgotten what that even sounded like. And then I waited. Waited for Joel to call and ask for another favor. Waited for Denise to send her yearly postcard pretending we were still close. But when the call finally came, it wasn't for help. It was to push me out, and that I thought was the most beautiful mistake they could have made. Because now I wasn't just ready to leave. I was ready to rise. That night, I stood in the kitchen after everyone had gone still wearing my apron like armor. The lights were dim, the candles melted down to husks, and the smell of roasted turkey clung to the curtains like a ghost. I stared at the sink full of dishes, my hands numb at my sides. I couldn't move. The silence after betrayal has a sound, a kind of deep echoing throb that fills your ears with memories you don't want anymore. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor. I didn't cry. I heaved. The kind of crying that doesn't look cinematic or graceful. It comes from the gut, from the ribs. It pulled me apart. I pressed my forehead to the cold tile and let years of silence pour out of me. All the yeses I'd said when I wanted to scream no. All the times I'd made myself small so others could feel large. All the birthdays I'd baked for anniversaries, I'd planned holidays I'd orchestrated without so much as a thank you card. They didn't just mock me, they erased me. And I let them. That was the truth I couldn't swallow. I had been complicit in my own erasure. And now I had a choice: disappear completely or rewrite the script. When I finally stood, my body trembled from exhaustion, but something in me had changed. There was a sharpness behind my ribs, a resolve. I walked slowly to my bedroom and opened the drawer, pulling out the deed one more time. My name was still there, still mine. That paper had been my secret. Now it would be my sword. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I brewed my coffee strong, and Black sat at the table and opened my notebook. Not a diary, not a journal, a plan. Step 1, call my lawyer again. Step 2, arrange a formal meeting with Joel. No texts, no emails, a face-to-face reckoning. Step 3, begin property evaluation for sale. Step 4, find a new place to live somewhere far, clean, and quiet. I'd never made a plan for myself before. Not really. My life had been one long, extended reaction to everyone else's needs. But now, I was the one at the wheel. I called Mr. Halverson first. "Ruth," he said warmly, "I was wondering when you'd reach out again." "I'm ready," I said, "but I need to do it my way. No drama, just truth." He understood. He always had. Next, I called Joel and left a message. "I'd like to talk, just you and me. Come by tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., bring no one." I didn't wait for him to reply. I didn't need his confirmation. For once, I wasn't asking permission. I was granting him the privilege of facing me. The rest of the day, I spent packing up parts of my soul letters from Mom, a locket from my childhood recipes in her handwriting. I touched every object not like a prisoner afraid to leave her cell, but like a woman reclaiming her time. When night fell, I went to the garage. There, hidden in an old cookie tin beneath the tool shelf, was every receipt I had saved, the money I'd lent Joel, the home repairs I'd paid for the hospital bills. I'd covered the holidays I'd hosted alone. Evidence, not for revenge, but for closure. They said I didn't belong here. I would show them the price of my belonging. The next day, I baked a fresh apple pie. Not because I wanted to impress Joel, but because I wanted the house to smell warm when he arrived, like it always had. At 6:57 p.m., his car pulled up. I didn't stand at the window. I waited. When he knocked, I opened the door and stood tall. He looked smug, slightly apologetic in that careless way he always was, like a man who knew he'd overstepped but still assumed he'd be forgiven. "Hey, Ruth," he said, grinning. "Hope I'm not late." "You're right on time," I said. "Come in." He walked inside like he owned the place. His mistake. I gestured to the dining room table. Laid out on it were the deed, the receipts, and a sealed envelope. Joel's eyes scanned the papers, and something in his face shifted. What's all this?" I said nothing. I sat down, folded my hands, and stared at him for a full 5 seconds. "Do you remember what you said to me at Christmas dinner?" I asked, voice low. He laughed awkwardly. Come on, Ruth, I was kidding. You weren't. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. I'm going to speak now, and you are going to listen. He sat back surprised, maybe even a little afraid. I told him everything. Not in anger, but with cold precision. I recounted the years, the caregiving, the financial support, the missed milestones, the dinners, the loneliness, the nights I cried myself to sleep while he partied and built a life he never once included me in. Then I slid the deed across the table. This house belongs to me, I said. It has for 5 years. Joel's face paled. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I just watched him swallow the reality he had never imagined possible. You said it was time for me to move out, I continued. And you were right. I will move out. But not because you said so, because I'm finally done. He blinked. Wait, you're selling it? Yes. He looked around suddenly, seeing the walls for what they were, not his childhood playground, but a home he had no claim to. You can't, Mom. She'd never. Mom did. I tapped the deed, with full intention, because she knew I was the only one who showed up. The room went silent. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped like a man begging a priest. Ruth, I was an idiot. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought, you didn't think, I said gently. You assumed that I'd always be here, that I had nowhere else to go. His voice cracked. What do you want from me? I smiled for the first time. Nothing, because the most powerful revenge is needing nothing from the person who once thought you needed them for everything. Joel didn't leave right away. After I handed him the deed, after I spelled out the truth in words, even his pride couldn't ignore. He just sat there, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting from the document to my face and back again. He looked like a man watching the scaffolding of his world crumble, brick by entitled brick. This can't be real, he muttered. I didn't respond. I just sipped my tea, calm, steady, silent, while he scrambled to reassemble the image of his life, the one where I was just Ruth, the family leftover, the harmless spinster baking casseroles in the background. He picked up the deed again, flipping it over as if searching for an asterisk, a loophole, a reason why the paper was lying and I wasn't. But Mom never said anything. No, I said. She didn't. She didn't want to start a war. She trusted me to protect the house, not use it as a weapon. She thought you might grow up one day. He flinched. I watched his pride shrink 2 sizes in his chest. Joel had always been the golden boy, the charming one, the baby, the one who crashed cars, ruined credit, and still got second chances, the one who could disappear for months and still be welcomed with warm hugs and plates of leftovers. And me, I was the one who stayed, who cleaned the messes he made, who absorbed the silence his absence created. He leaned forward now, trying to gather himself. Okay, I get it. I messed up. I shouldn't have said what I said at dinner. That's not the problem, I replied. He looked at me confused. The problem isn't that you said it. The problem is that you meant it. You weren't joking, Joel. You weren't teasing. You were clearing the path, testing the water, seeing if anyone would stop you. I stood, walked over to the fireplace mantel, and ran a hand along the edge. There was still a faint scratch where Joel had banged his toy truck as a kid. I used to tell Mom I'd refinish it. I never did. Part of me didn't want to erase the history, but now I saw that some history needs to be scrubbed away. Joel's voice cracked behind me. So what, you're gonna kick me out of my own childhood home after everything? I turned to face him. Your childhood home. Joel, you moved out at 19 and never came back unless you needed money or a place to crash. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who wiped Mom's mouth when she couldn't swallow, who held her hand when she died, who cleaned out her closet when everyone else left. I was the one who paid the property taxes while you were off getting divorced for the second time. He looked down ashamed, but not enough. I didn't want the house, I said. I never asked for it, but I earned it. He stood up suddenly, defensive hands on his hips like a scolded teenager. So what now? You're gonna sell it just to spite me. No, I'm going to sell it to save me. The words landed like thunder. He sat down again, slower this time. You're serious. I nodded. I already spoke to the realtor. The listing goes up next week. But where will you go? I paused. And that right there was the most telling moment of all. Where will you go? He hadn't asked that out of concern. He asked it because in his world, I didn't exist outside this house. I was part of the architecture, part of the furniture, a woman who lived in the shadows of other people's lives. He didn't know me. Not really. I'm going where people don't call me a burden, I said. Where I can read a book without waiting for someone to knock and ask for another favor. Where I can breathe without feeling like an afterthought. He looked genuinely stunned. Ruth, I didn't know you felt that way. You never asked. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that truth too heavy to lift. Joel reached for the envelope I had sealed and pushed across the table earlier. What's this? Open it. He tore it gently and pulled out a stack of copies, scanned receipts, bank transfers, grocery bills, medical expenses, all in neat rows. I'd highlighted them, every cent I'd spent on the house, every time I'd covered for him, every act of quiet sacrifice. His eyes widened as he flipped through them. You kept all this. I kept everything, because I knew one day you'd try to rewrite the past. He sighed, closing the folder. Ruth, I'm sorry. I studied his face. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The one who used to run into my room during thunderstorms. The one who used to beg me to make him pancakes shaped like animals. The one who used to look up to me. But that boy had grown into a man who forgot I existed unless he needed something. And now he wanted forgiveness. I believe you're sorry, I said, but sorry doesn't fix this. He nodded slowly, genuinely. I want to fix it, whatever that means. I crossed my arms. It means stepping back, letting me go, letting me choose my life now. He swallowed hard. Will you forgive me? I looked at him, and after a long pause, I said, yes, because forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from the poison of resentment. But forgiveness isn't a contract. It's not a ticket back into the parts of my life I was rebuilding. It's a boundary, not a bridge. I forgive you, Joel, I said gently, but I'm still leaving. He nodded again, but this time his shoulders sagged like he finally understood what that meant. He stood up, looked around the house one last time, then walked to the door. Before he stepped out, he turned and said, Thank you, Ruth, for everything. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. I didn't reply, because finally, I didn't need his words to know my worth. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I was alone. But I wasn't broken. I was ready. The next morning, the world looked different. It wasn't the weather. The sky still hung in that cold, pale gray of late winter. It wasn't the house. It still stood there, creaking slightly in the wind, its bones worn and familiar. No, the difference was inside me. It was in the stillness I felt when I woke up. Not the usual heaviness, not the dread of another day serving people who never saw me. Just silence, a clean, wide-open space in my chest. And for once, it didn't feel hollow. It felt like peace. I got out of bed, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and opened the window. The crisp air rushed in and kissed my cheeks. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and just stood there watching the trees sway, the old bird bath wobble slightly in the frost, the mail truck humming down the street. No one was asking me for anything. No one needed me right now. It felt glorious. Then around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. Joel! I let it ring, twice, 3 times. Then I picked up. Ruth. His voice sounded tired, raw almost. It wasn't the voice of a man trying to win. It was the voice of someone trying to reach. Hi, I said softly. I've been thinking all night. I waited. I was wrong, he continued. Not just about Christmas, about everything. You were always there. And God, I don't even know what to say. I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that. But I want to try and earn it, somehow. His voice cracked at the end. Not a performance. The real kind. The kind you hear once in a decade. I didn't reply right away, because forgiveness isn't something I hand out like cookies. It's something I carry in a locked box. Something I unlock only after I know the person in front of me won't pick it up and use it against me. I do forgive you, I said at last, but that doesn't mean I'm coming back or staying. Silence. Then I figured, I guess I hoped we could start over, do things right. I sighed. Joel starting over would require both of us to be who we never were. I was never your equal in this family. I was the cleaner, the fixer, the woman behind the curtain, pulling the strings, making the holidays happen, keeping the roof over your head without ever being acknowledged. That's not how I saw you, he whispered. But that's how you treated me, I said gently. And I take my cues from actions now, not words. He didn't argue. That was new. I want to show you I've changed, he said. Whatever that takes. You can start, I replied by never calling me unless you're calling for me. Not for help, not for favors, just to check in. I will. And I mean this with love, Joel. But I don't want to spend my life being part of this family out of guilt. I want to choose how I belong and who I belong to. He exhaled. I understand. We hung up after a few minutes more. No tears, no drama. Just a soft, tired understanding. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. But even honesty isn't enough sometimes, because truth doesn't undo damage, and sorry doesn't restore time. I stood at the window again, watching a crow land on the fence post. And I made a promise to myself right then. I would forgive, but I would not return. I would not go back to being the woman who put herself last in the name of love. I would not spend another decade waiting for phone calls that never came for thank yous, that didn't arrive for respect that had to be begged for. Love, I've learned, isn't proven by how much you endure. It's proven by how well you protect yourself when others won't. Over the next few weeks, I moved deliberately. Sandra, my realtor, listed the house and began scheduling private viewings. The first family that walked in two young parents and a toddler with wild curls reminded me of possibility, of beginnings. I stayed in the background sipping tea while Sandra handled the tour. The toddler wandered into the kitchen, looked up at me and said, "You live here?" Not for much longer, I smiled. She blinked, then nodded wisely. "Okay, it smells like cinnamon." "Good," I whispered. "That's how I want it to smell." I got 3 offers in 5 days, each higher than the last. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the freedom those numbers represented. The chance to live where no one knew me as the one who gave everything. The chance to start again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I called Denise, too. We hadn't spoken much since Mom's funeral. She hadn't even shown up for Christmas. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "Ruth, I'm selling the house," I said simply. Long pause. "You okay?" "I am now." More silence. "I'm sorry, Ruth," she said softly. "I know I wasn't there. I should have been." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I didn't say it with venom. Just truth. That's the thing about healing, sometimes it comes with a blade. We said our goodbyes. No promises of rekindled closeness. Just the fragile echo of a family stretched too far for too long. By the time I signed the sale papers, I had already chosen my new home, a small lakefront cottage 2 hours north. A porch swing, a fireplace, a tiny herb garden waiting to be planted. It didn't look like much on the listing, but to me, it looked like sovereignty. The movers arrived on a Thursday morning, just as the snow began to fall in soft, weightless sheets across the lawn. I watched from the porch as they loaded the last of the labeled boxes into the truck kitchen photos, books I actually like. I had donated almost everything else. This time, I wasn't packing someone else's memories. I was packing mine. No guilt, no apology, only choice. For the first time in decades, I wasn't leaving a place because someone else needed me somewhere else. I wasn't chasing obligation. I wasn't seeking approval. I was simply done. Not in anger, not in bitterness. Just done. I walked through each room of the house once more, trailing my fingertips along the walls like a farewell blessing. The den where I sat through long, aching nights massaging Mom's swollen feet and pretending I didn't hear her cry from the pain. The kitchen where I spent entire seasons baking pies and casseroles and birthday cakes that disappeared faster than any words of thanks. The stairway where I once stood after Joel's first marriage fell apart waiting for him to come home with his suitcase and his arrogance expecting to find refuge once again. And my bedroom? My quiet little sanctuary. The one room in the house where I could still hear my own thoughts, where I had kept the deed, the receipts, and the little scraps of power I wasn't yet ready to claim. Now I had claimed them all. As I closed the door for the last time, I whispered into the empty house, "You were never the prison, just the mirror." Outside, Sandra waited with a warm smile. She handed me the final sale envelope. "It's all done, Ruth. The buyers are thrilled, and the inspection passed with flying colors your care shows." I nodded, breathing in that strange blend of finality and beginning. "Thank you, Sandra, for treating me like I mattered." "You do," she said, then added gently, "What's next for you?" I looked at the horizon, the road ahead. "My own chapter," I said. Finally. We hugged. Then I stepped into my car and drove north past the borders of the town that had seen me at my lowest and never bothered to look closer. I arrived at the lake cottage just after sunset. It was smaller than the old house, cozier, a wood-burning stove, a tiny reading nook by the window, and a porch that overlooked a frozen lake, now sparkling under the last glow of winter light. I stood on that porch for a long time that night. No voices, no demands, no one asking me what was for dinner. Just the wind in the pine trees and the soft crunch of snow beneath my boots. I felt my mother in that wind. Not her sadness, not her struggle, but her strength, her wisdom. Her final act of love, handing me the deed before she left this world, trusting I would know what to do with it when the time came. And I had. The next morning, I lit a fire-brewed tea in my favorite chipped mug and sat by the window wrapped in a blanket. For the first time in years, my thoughts were entirely my own. I opened a journal and began to write. Not a list of groceries, not chores, not reminders for other people. Just feelings, dreams, possibilities. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Joel. Dear Ruth, I don't know where to start, so I'll just say it. Thank you for everything you ever did for us for me. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I see it now. You were the foundation beneath our whole family, and I treated you like an afterthought. I was wrong. I know you've chosen a new life, and I respect that. I hope someday you'll let me visit not because I deserve it, but because I'd like to know the real you, the one I never bothered to see. Love, Joel. I stared at the page for a long time, and for once I didn't cry, because I had already mourned what I lost. And now I was choosing what I kept. I wrote him back short and simple. Dear Joel, thank you for your letter. I forgive you. I always did deep down. But you're right, I've chosen something different now. You're welcome to visit someday. Not today, but maybe when the lake melts. Ruth. I set the letter aside and stepped outside. The sun was just beginning to melt the ice on the edges of the lake. Spring was coming. And so was I. Not as someone's sister, not as someone's caretaker, not as someone's fallback plan, but as Ruth Evelyn Delaney, the woman who finally walked away and didn't look back.